And so 30,000 men have been training for years for just this job. Like I said earlier, the day was called Der Tag, the day. This has been planned for a long time, and the Germans have essentially a special unit of 30,000 guys whose job it is to take out these forts if the Belgians don't stand aside and surrender them. The Belgians don't stand aside and surrender them. And in fact, the Belgians are going to teach the first great lesson of the war about what's changed since the last time great powers faced off. How much the killing power that machines afforded mankind on the battlefield, how much that had changed the age-old equation of war. Machines have been taken over for a long time, becoming more and more important. This is the war where they take over completely. And man's supremacy on the battlefield, even though they're the ones who run the machines, will always be now, secondary compared to the killing power and mechanization that can be brought to bear, by modern societies. The technology was devastating when used against tribal peoples and nations that couldn't compete militarily. The Belgians are going to show what a tiny little army of chocolate soldiers is what the Germans thought they were going to face. What a tiny little army of chocolate soldiers can do to the greatest army in the world because of the deadliness of the weapons at hand. And one of the interesting sort of sub-themes of this whole upcoming conflict is how long it takes some people to absorb the lessons that are being taught in this conflict. Lesson number one is how deadly the weapons are and how you have to account for that. Some of the generals and military thinkers understood this going into the war because they had paid close attention to that 1905 war I told you about, the Russo-Japanese War, which, by the way, American President Teddy Roosevelt won a Nobel Prize for helping to broker the peace for that. But that taught lessons about what happens when two sides armed with machine guns and two sides armed with modern artillery and all that face off. But the lessons were not the kind of lessons some people wanted to learn. I mean, if you were a cavalry commander, for example, your arm of the military is already not looked upon as very survivable. The wars all since Napoleon have kind of shown that, listen, cavalry just dies on the battlefield. The only thing that cavalry commanders still have going in their favor is there aren't really automobiles yet. There will be by the time this war is over. But they're a novelty. They'll be used in strange, innovative situations. But militaries of the world don't have tons of automobiles, running. It's not mechanized like the Second World War. Everybody's using horses. Even if they die on the battlefield, like sheaves of wheat being scythed down, you have nothing to replace that mobility with. But these cavalry commanders don't want to hear that it's even worse than it used to be. Wow, wait till the modern artillery machine guns get a hold of your cavalry. They don't want to hear that, so they talk about the results as being unrepresentative. Commanders who are very, involved in the idea of the power of the bayonet and the charge and the offensive, for example, the entire French outlook on war right now is connected to this idea that you attack. And, you attack with the bayonet. Doesn't really mean you're going to maybe get into hand-to-hand combat, but that aggressive style of warfare is what you want. If you've been preaching that, and that's your country's doctrine, and your entire military is organized around the culture of the offensive, and cran, which is the French word, I guess, for like guts, and, it's all about guts. Nobody wants to hear that machine guns just rip guts out. That's the only thing they care about, guts, and it doesn't work to have bayonet charges and ridiculous offensives. Well, the French would say, yes, well, what doesn't work for the Russians or the Japanese will work for the French, and that's why we have a great military. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to rationalize what you don't want to learn.